Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. And on today's show, I've got Mitch Kahn. Mitch is a personal trainer, fat loss expert, and body transformational specialist. With so much conflicting and contradictory information out there, it can be very frustrating and confusing to know what to do. In his own experience, he's experimented with many diets over the years, and while he's lost a few pounds, he eventually fell off the wagon and yo-yoed back up in his weight. Eventually, his weight ballooned up to 265 pounds. He had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglyceride, and was pre-diabetic. It wasn't until he hit a low point by breaking a chair with a 250-pound weight limit that he knew he had to change his unhealthy lifestyle. Over time, he slowly changed his eating, exercise, and lifestyle habits and was able to heal the years of abuse he had subjected his body through a lack of exercise and a total disregard for what he ate. In less than a year, he had lost 75 pounds, which he has kept off for over 12 years, gotten off all medications, and had greatly boosted his energy and confidence levels. In fact, he was recently measured at having a physical age 29 years younger than his chronological age. He realized he had unlocked the secrets of lifelong fat loss. So welcome onto the show, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I probably should expand on that a little bit because I actually have gone through two transformations in my life. That's the first one. The second one occurred about 5 years ago. And what happened at that point, so even though I had gotten healthier, I got diagnosed with two different medical conditions pretty much in the same month. I first was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And not too long after that, I took what's called a coronary artery scan, and they found quite a bit of plaque buildup in my arteries. And the ideal score for that is 0. And my score was over 1,400. So I had to go back to the drawing board. And I think a lot of that is attributable to having an awful diet throughout most of my adult life. But I went back to the drawing board, did a lot of research, and basically became a plant-based eater. And that was about 5 years ago. And by doing that, one, I was able to keep the prostate cancer in check. So I still own my prostate. I didn't have to have it surgically removed. And all I go through is what's called active surveillance, where every 3 to 6 months I have my PSA taken. And it's actually remained fairly steady to the point where the last biopsy I had, my Gleason score, which is sort of the way they categorize the level of cancer in your prostate, had actually gone down. And the doctor, as well as myself, attributed it to a combination of being plant-based as well as, the exercise regimen that I put myself through. And same thing with the heart, the issue with the plaque in the arteries. I've gone through several stress tests over the last 5 years. And the thing that stands out is that I scored really well. In fact, the cardiologist said to me that he hopes when he has to do his, that he scores as well as me. So I attribute that to the way I eat and the way I take care of myself. And that became basically my second transformation story.
And Mitch, you talked a little bit about, you've gone on a plant-based transformation. For those that don't know the difference between what is plant-based and veganism, can you give them a little bit of a educational lesson?
Sure. And probably should throw vegetarianism in there as well. Um, the difference between vegetarianism and veganism, starting there, is a lot of vegetarians will include dairy and eggs in their diet. Whereas if you're vegan, you're not going to have any animal products whatsoever. And that would include honey, because that's a product of bees, obviously. Um, so veganism is more of an ethical movement as well as a potentially eating or dietary eating style, although there's a lot of vegan junk food out there as well. When when you say plant-based, and I probably have to distinguish that because I'm whole food plant-based. So what that means is that for the most part, my diet consists of whole foods, not raw, but cooked, but mainly whole grains, beans, vegetables, fruits. Um, so very, very little processed food. So that's whole food plant-based as opposed to plant-based. Because when you're plant-based, the definition is sort of blurry because some people call themselves plant-based, but will still include a little bit of meat in their diet, or fish or poultry. Um, I call that plant predominant, but people use different terminology. But the main difference between veganism and plant-based eating is generally speaking, is veganism is associated more with a ethical movement toward animals as well as eating, whereas whole food plant-based is geared more toward just dietary style.
Okay. And the transition, was it fairly, I won't say simplistic. Was it an easy transition for you to make, or was it very, there's a few upheaval moments?
No, because I had the support of my wife, we pretty much cleaned out our fridge and pantry and donated the food, um, and just basically made the switch to plant-based eating overnight. Um, I don't necessarily recommend that because sometimes that's pretty hard for a lot of people to do. So when I coach people, we go through a little longer transition period, and that could be based on cutting out maybe meat at first, and then meat and poultry, and then meat, poultry, and fish, or it could be just eating plant-based on certain days. It all depends on what the person uh, can live with, because it's hard to make the transition. If you're used to eating meat and that's sort of part of how you've grown up. For me, I think it was a little easier because my wife and I had become pescatarians, um, which is basically eat fish and fruits and vegetables and other whole foods. Um, about a year before we went totally whole food plant based, and that was just a choice we made. That wasn't really geared to the health issues that I was experiencing. But it made the transition easier just to be able to cut out the fish.
And also, you've obviously competed at the Senior Olympics. Was that transition before or after that?
That was actually after that. So I competed in the Senior Olympics in 2019, which was a little over a year ago. So And that was I've always been competitive, and I I enjoyed working out. And I had actually trained a fella a couple years earlier, a 70-year-old who wanted to prepare for a senior Olympics. Uh, and he had been competing for a little bit, but he wanted to improve in his events, and he was a track and field athlete. And so I ended up training him, and he did really well. He actually won several gold medals at the national level. Um, but he kept saying, you need to do this. You're in better shape than most of the athletes out there. And I eventually talked myself into doing it, and it was a lot of fun.
And back in 2019, Mitch, were you the only one that was plant-based / vegan that you knew of?
In my at the Senior Olympics, or just in general?
At the Senior Olympics.
Yeah, as far as I know. Yeah. Now I didn't get to the nationals because they canceled them because of COVID. But I know that there are people who are vegan that have competed at the national level too. But that was where I was headed if COVID hadn't happened.
And do you think within the realms of sports now, and a little bit less with the general populace, do you think you're gonna see more and more athletes turning their head to either whole plant food like you were talking about, or to veganism, to be able to, I won't say enhance their performance, because everybody is each to their own. But do you think more and more people are going to do it for both the ethical reasons, but also a little bit of what have I got to lose by trying something slightly a little bit different?
Yeah, there's actually there was a movie that came out a couple of years ago called The Game Changers that highlighted quite a number of vegan athletes in all different sports, and they all talk about the same thing, how it enhanced their performance because they had less inflammation, so they recovered faster, and they would do well in their sports. I think you'll probably see more of that. 2 years ago, quite a number. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Quite a number of players on the Tennessee Titans football team went vegan. One of the players, his wife was a vegan chef, and she convinced the team to let her bring food in for some of the players. And then it grew to probably about 15 different players eating that way. And they all talked about how it improved their performance, their recovery. And that seems to be the general theme that you hear from a lot of athletes that try it. I know there's a number of vegans in the NBA, as well as in Major League Baseball. There's a couple I know in professional soccer, in MMA, bicycling. So yeah, I think it's spreading, and I think as more and more people understand the benefits of, especially the anti-inflammatory effects of eating more plant-based, and how it really helps performance and recovering. I think you'll see more athletes at least try it out.
And with you working with obviously a little bit more, I don't want to be rude or condescending here, because I don't want to get abused for anybody, let alone yourself. But in terms of working with it, population that's slightly older, do you think they see more health benefits as a result of going veganism, as opposed to maybe somebody that's maybe in their late 30s, early 20s, the ones that possibly jumped on the bandwagon in the early days of veganism, especially. Do you think they're seeing more noticeable results as I don't want to put as a result, as a consequence of making that transition from what is very much a historical Western diet of eating a lot of quantity of meat, especially in the United States, to then going obviously predominantly plant-based?
Yeah, I think a number of people who follow me are older, and they talk about the health benefits that they achieve in terms of getting off meds, in terms of less aches and pains in their joints, in terms of helping with heart issues, with type 2 diabetes issues, with losing weight in general. Because when you eat plant-based, you literally don't have to almost worry about counting calories or macros. You can, because the caloric density of plant-based food is much lower than meats, oils, processed foods. You can eat quite a bit more and maintain or lose weight on it. Um, my wife's a perfect example. When we went plant-based, and she's always been slight in build, but she lost 10 pounds that she didn't really want to lose just by eating plant-based. But the interesting thing is it helped because she had smaller bones. She dealt with osteoporosis, and by going plant-based, it actually, along with doing weight-bearing exercises, really helped her move out of being or having osteoporosis. So it actually improved her bone density. So there's a lot of different health benefits that are attributable to eating that way. But I've dealt with younger people too, and I think there's an openness on younger people to try out plant-based eating or becoming vegan. I think it's more accepted nowadays. There's a lot more plant-based and vegan alternatives in the grocery stores, on restaurant menus. So it's becoming, I think, more accepted to the general public, and you're not thought of anymore as, just having to eat lettuce and greens all the time, like rabbit food. I had a client, she was in her mid-30s and was a type 1 diabetic, and I convinced her to go plant-based, and she was able to reduce the amount of insulin she had to take. She's always going to have to take insulin being type 1, but she was able to reduce the amount that she had to take daily by switching her diet.
But you talked a little bit there, Mitch, about you've got to be wary of calorie intakes a little bit less so than obviously the mainstream people within dieting. But you also said at the very beginning of the episode of veganism with processed food. I obviously know the answer to why those manufacturers are going to create that product, but be it from your standpoint, can it be more troublesome, especially like seasonal times of the year? We're now obviously in the new year, but obviously Christmas was only a week or so ago as we were recording, and Thanksgiving only a couple of weeks prior to that. Does it get a little bit more, I'm going to use the word tedious, because ultimately it's different for me, so if it's something new, it's obviously more difficult and more challenging, but can it be more adverse to go veganism, especially those times of the year?
Yeah, I think the temptation's always there, especially if you're just starting out to fall back on your old ways. Uh, there's so much good food connected with Thanksgiving and Christmas that I think it becomes tough. But there's a lot of alternatives that you can make that um, take the place of the food that you might eat on what I'll call a standard Western diet, standard American diet. I saw a recipe over the holidays for somebody who made a holiday ham, and I'll put ham in quotes because it was actually made out of seitan, which is a whole wheat gluten product, but it was spiced up to taste like a ham. But but when you really stop and think about it, people who eat meat, if you took all the spices away from the meat and you just ate it plain, I'm not saying raw, but plain, are you really eating the meat for the texture, or are you eating the meat for the spicing up that goes on the meat? And I make the argument to people that you're probably eating it for the spicing of the food. And so you can recreate those spices on plant-based foods. And while the texture might be a wee bit different, you get the same taste. So for instance, we meal prep on Sundays for the week, uh, just because my wife's schedule, my schedule are a little different. So this week we're eating, well, again, I'll put it in quotes, meatloaf, but it's made out of lentils and bulgur as the two main ingredients. It looks like meatloaf. It tastes like meatloaf. It has the same consistency as meatloaf, but it's not meat. And after a while, you have to stop and think and say, why why am I really eating these foods that have sort of a negative impact potentially from all the scientific research? It has a negative impact on your health and what's going on inside your body. And that's not even talking about the ethical reasons of killing animals. I'm just talking about the food here. Uh, and you can create the same taste, um, but you also develop new tastes. And the beauty of some of the foods that are out there now, let's say, and I think this is probably available in the UK too, the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Burger, which are basically plant-based burgers that even look like they bleed blood like a regular hamburger, and they taste pretty much the same. Now, is that an ideal whole food, plant-based food? No. But for somebody who wants a transition, it's a great way to transition from meat eating to non-meat eating. And so those foods serve a purpose, um, but you also have to be aware of a lot of processed foods that get labeled vegan, and people think vegan, oh, that's going to be healthy, and they might not necessarily be healthy because they still will have a high content of fat and salt that isn't really good for you. So you have to be careful too, because the food industry is great at marketing things as healthy and natural, and those words really don't have a true meaning when it comes to marketing, except to try and sell a product to the unsuspecting consumer.
So let me throw a spanner in the works here then, Mitch. For the skepticals I'm probably on the fence a little bit, which is not the best all the time. But just for the skeptics out there, what do you say to people that would say to you, well, you want to have something that looks like meat, you want it to look identical to it, but you don't want to have meat? What would you say to somebody like that? Because ultimately, they, in your estimation, they have a valid point. If you want to go against everything that is what it ethically stands for, if you put that to one side, but just put it from you want to get rid of meat in your diet, why do you then put in something that looks like it to replace it?
Looks like meat. Well, I think some of it is, I guess I'll label it psychological. We're brought up with certain foods, unless you've been brought up vegan or plant-based your entire life. We've been brought up with steak and hamburger and ham and bacon and all that. And when you make the switch, especially early on in the early stages of going plant-based, you will sometimes long for those types of foods. And so you want to find a replacement for them, but still feel like you're eating them. So I think a lot of it is psychological. I think as you become more and more experienced in plant-based eating, and probably even plant-based food preparation, there are so many different things that you can create that are not, plant-based versions of meats that still provide, a whole host of, your vitamins, your minerals, your nutrients, your carb needs, your protein needs, even your fat needs, that you can eventually, get away from that. But, there's no real need to. We'll make a pizza, so we can make pizza dough, and you have the choice of using plant-based cheeses, or you can go without cheese. You have your choice of putting on plant-based sources of Italian sausage, let's say, or you can leave that off. So it gives you sort of a wide variety. There's nothing wrong with making pizza and putting on plant-based cheese and the plant-based Italian sausage and making it look and taste like a regular pizza. And maybe early on you do that, but over time you might say to yourself, okay, well, there's still a high fat content in the plant-based cheese, and if you keep oil out of your diet, then most of them are going to have oil, so you might cut those out completely. And same thing with the plant-based Italian sausage. But there's nothing wrong with layering, like a barbecue sauce or a hot sauce or a marinara sauce on the pizza base or the pizza dough, and then throwing on a ton of different vegetables and cooking it and still have a pizza. So to me, it gives you options and allows for people to transition, or it also allows you to eat a combination of both. There's a book or a series of books that are out there written by a fellow by the name of Dan Buettner, who, for a project for National Geographic, studied areas of the world where there were a high number of individuals who lived into their hundreds. And those areas are called blue zones. There's one in Okinawa. There's one in Costa Rica. There's one in, I think it's Sardinia. There's actually one even in the US in Loma Linda, California. And what he found, and I got a chance to listen to him talk live, so it was a pretty interesting talk, and I read some of his books. But what he found is that most of these people ate a plant-based diet, but they weren't necessarily all plant-based. You know, they would have occasional pieces of lean cuts of meat, especially on special occasions. They would occasionally drink alcohol, and they would engage in physical activity, not necessarily exercise, but just physical activity into their 70s, 80s, 90s, even hundreds. And they were healthier than most people in the Western world. So I don't necessarily push people to go entirely plant-based because I think that's a personal decision. But I do help them understand the benefits of adding more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and legumes into their diet to lose weight, get healthier, and just overall, sort of beat the effects of some of the inflammatory substances that are in the standard American diet.
I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear you say that one being in California, but obviously the Californians are a little bit known worldwide to be a little bit more open to a lot of things. And obviously you would have probably heard this term of flexi dieting when it comes to veganism, more specific, probably more than plant-based. And I think I echo what you say, Mitch, because I think it's just a different take on what was once upon a time, a balanced diet or Mediterranean diet or things similar to that nature. I think flexitarianism, I think it is this real reason, this real term is probably another addition to, if we were to really go back, of what diet or what meal preparation is actually key to. If we go really back to the people that are, devout paleos, the bodybuilders and things of that nature, the powerlifters, flexitarianism is really what's possibly, I wasn't living back then, but I would probably hazard a guess as what cavemen and women were eating. They ate whatever they could, whenever they could. So if that meant going weeks without meat, it was week without meat. And then obviously when it came time to catching whatever was available, if that was meat, you had the meat. Whereas I think where we've got into this area now within modern society of, convenience, food really, is we can have anything whenever we want, wherever we want. And it's maybe lost some of its novelty of you being slightly older than me, like seasonal vegetables, seasonal fruits. Whereas now in every grocery store or supermarket, pretty much the shelves are stocked year round. We've created probably a generation that does not know where food comes from, unless you take them to it, which some of those TV programs are quite funny. When you take kids from out of the city into farms and you say, well, that's where the beef comes from, or that's where the pork comes from. It's like, well, it doesn't magically appear on your dinner plate. It's got to come from somewhere, be it if it's an animal product, it's a plant product. I don't know. It will probably come an age where I see this coming around in the future at some point, where it's probably going to be an ethical reason towards why we shouldn't eat vegetables, because they will have feelings. But who's to know whether or not that does or does not, because obviously it's a living thing. So it probably does feel. But unless you're maybe watching a cartoon or some of our TV advertisement here in the UK, so it's a nod to lots of Brits. So Aldi's using they commercialize the carrot to make him their marketing spokesperson. So that'd be funny. I think they need to do one with probably the Looney Tunes, because that'd be funny. Because one of the supermarkets did the opposite, where they manipulated the carrot to look like it had a face, to have a kind of a dig at this other supermarket. So it's like, oh, I didn't notice that. It's like they had to put it in slow-mo. That's very clever. That's very subtle, subliminal marketing towards another company. We're going to eat the competition. But obviously the point that I'm making is have this open-mindedness and be flexible, because I think where people are confused and a little bit from the marketing companies themselves manipulated is they're brainwashed to think, I need to have low fat, low sugar, low salt. Obviously, you and I know that's technically not true. It's lower, it's not low. But I think where people need to be educated is we need to be a bit more flexible and a little bit more open with trying different fruits, different vegetables. Obviously, I come from a weird household, because people will ask my mother when I was a kid, how do you make James eat his vegetables? That would be the first thing that was gone off my plate. I wouldn't say I'm abnormal. It's very unusual to eat vegetables first, and having a child willingly do it. I didn't like every vegetable, so I was quote unquote normal. But I was probably, from a psychological perspective, taught, try it once, then make a decision. And then if you don't like it, we won't make you, because you probably come from a generation, you will stay at the table until you finish it. Whereas mine was, I didn't like parsnips, I didn't like Brussels sprouts, but James, try one. Then if you don't like it, we won't make you eat it. Obviously, as an adult now, I'll quite happily eat them, because I wasn't forced to eat something that I particularly didn't like. I don't know whether it was the texture or the taste. I think the vegetables have been, altered slightly to people's taste, as I think Brussels sprouts have become sweeter than they once were, because they've companies have said, well, we've taken the best of each variety to make like a Christmas one so it tastes better, so thus we can come back to your earlier point of sell more product. And that's the same with, I said the carrot with obviously the supermarket here in the UK. People have become accustomed to an orange carrot, whereas that's not the real variety is purple. But
right.
Supermarkets now sell, the rainbow variety of, yellow, orange, purple, and they've got, I think the yellow one is slightly sweeter than the orange, and then the purple tastes like nothing. But ultimately, because people have become accustomed to an orange carrot in their lifetime, the carrot must be, or if a carrot is a carrot, it must be orange. Whereas I think, if my history serves me right, it comes back to the Dutch and the House of Orange. Thus, they wanted to change the color of the orange, which is a science. But I think people need to be flexible. Obviously, we're going to have to probably eat more of the stuff, as we've kind of demonstrified the agriculture and kind of created too much product. We've kind of neglected to actually look after it, thus create quantity but not very good quality. So I think that 5 a day is going to go out the window, and it might be hopefully not triple at one point, but certainly double. And obviously that shocks people, because they're struggling to get 5 a day. Now you want to eat 10.
Yeah. I think you raised a couple of interesting issues there. One, I think our food habits tend to get formed by how we grow up, and it usually continues into adulthood unless, if you get exposed to other things and you start to experiment and expand your I guess your repertoire of what to eat. Although if you really look at what most people eat, they'll typically eat the same things over and over again, um, month in and month out. Um, but yeah, I think being flexible is important. Because I have clients who come to me and they'll say, "I'm not giving up my meat," and I'll say, "I don't want you to give up your meat. My I eat plant based, and I want to help you understand why it's important to maybe include more plants in your diet, but I'm not going to force you because that's not going to work. I'm not going to force you to not eat meat if that's something you want to continue." So I almost have to take an agnostic approach to some people, um, because they don't want to give things up, and that's fine. That's a personal choice that everyone has to make. But there's other people who come to me and they say, you know, I've read a lot about it. I and I need to make the change for health or whatever the reason is. And those people, they can do it on their own, but they typically don't have a plan on how to do it on their own. Um, and that's where they need the help. As a matter of fact, although this podcast is going to be released later, I'm actually putting out a post on my Facebook page today about needing a plan if you're going to do this, because you can't just go into it. I mean, you can read, there's plenty of books out there to read written by famous doctors about the value of eating plant-based, and you can buy some of their cookbooks and what have you. But if you go into it without having a plan and just think you can transition, there's very few people who can really do that, because we're really talking about a habit change and lifestyle change that needs to be coached and supported, because most people can't do it on their own. And I'm not saying that all people can't do it on their own, because there's plenty that can, but I think you need the support and the accountability and the coaching to help transition through these things, because there's going to be a lot of questions that come up, from how to prepare food to um, how to choose the right foods in the supermarket, to what the right combinations should be to eat, to if I'm losing weight and I'm not exercising, I'm going to lose pounds of fat as well as pounds of muscle. So how do I maintain my muscle mass uh, while I'm losing weight? So, it, the value of coaching to help get you through those issues, I think, is really important. That's why you and I exist, is to help people like do that.
Well, I echo what you say, Mitch, because ultimately, as we're recording this at the beginning of January, people had may not made New Year's resolutions. Who knows? Especially with as last year. But I doubt they would definitely wish for a different year in 21 to 20. But do they go in it with a resolution and the right intent, or do they go in with a plan? Most people obviously do the right intention and never go in with a plan. You and I both probably fall into that category in some retrospect, into some things. We've obviously been held accountable to not do that in 2021. I've never been so prepared from a business sense. I won't say in my entire life, because I was pretty prepared as an athlete, but I was accountable to other people and probably to myself on a daily basis. So, you know, the small inches of bread obviously make a massive loaf because you don't see those little incremental changes. Whereas some, not most, like you echoed, will go into wanting to make wholesale changes. Not just maybe from a dietary perspective, it could be training, it could be mindset. But you don't have the foggiest, to use a British kind of slogan, to go there, because you have the right intentions to change. And like I used from obviously James Clear's Atomic Habits, your identity and your habits are two different things, and they're like two rams butting heads. If they're not in alignment with each other, it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what the best intentions you have. If your new habit is not in alignment with your former self, as we will call it, it's never going to work, because ultimately you're not in alignment with yourself. Because I'm going to find whatever way I can to hit the self-destruct button. That's and that's self-preservation. It's the mind is determined to win, to keep you comfortable, safe. Obviously, I use those two words. It's completely different things, but what is comfortable and what is safe, I would say easy. Obviously, I'm not going to say to do something risky, especially not now. But and I always say that it's not really, if it's not life and death situation, it's not really worth doing it. But be it, if you need to change something drastically, it's not going to be easy. Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
No, because you're going to have your what's called in psychology your primitive lizard brain talking to you and talking you out of doing all these different things. So it is. I agree completely. It's the personal values that you have for yourself. So, you know, having worked in the gym as a trainer for a number of years, you know, how many people join in January based on their New Year's resolution to get fit, and by February, 90% of them aren't coming anymore.
It'd be interesting to see the statistic this year, though. That would be that's going to be the anomaly for the industry, is 2021, because how many people do not go to the gym because of COVID, and ultimately what we've known as a result of what was the trainer who was on The Biggest Loser? She contracted COVID because got too close to a friend of hers and contracted it, and she was adamant, do not go to the gym. And that's a pretty much I won't call it an expert within our industry, a well-known figure within the industry, saying to you, it's not really worth the risk to go to keep your gains up. Obviously, though, you got your other side of the fence, of the ones that it is. I won't disagree with this. You know, the betterment of people's mental health, I would agree with that. It is a uplifter, a boost, because I went for a walk the wee hours of this morning here just to get a breath of fresh air, really, and just to blow some cobwebs off, and I felt better for doing that. So it even though obviously there was not a soul to be seen, that's not one of the reasons why I did it, but be it, even though you can be alone with your thoughts when there's nobody about, it does give you a little bit psychological boost. So I can see where the governments themselves are in a hard place, because the science back it. Well, but obviously you and I know there's not the most cleanliness place to start with, but obviously there's benefits for both sides, be it online. In our case, we're all kind of a hybrid. In my case, or for the people that are devout, as we're recording this, the gyms are shut in the UK. So, but be it for the US, you can go to the gym if you choose to, but ultimately there's probably always a risk, but you've got to be able to stick with your guns in terms of if it's going to be able to get the best out of you, and you can't do it in the confines of your house, you're going to have to do it. I read a pretty eerie and scary post somebody shared on, I think it was Facebook last night, of you're at risk, you self-isolate and don't worry what I do, which I think is what's wrong with society to a certain extent, of, there's no consequence for people's actions. That's probably an undertone to, we talk about accountability, but self-accountability, that I'm going to do whatever I want. Obviously the want, if it's good, bad, or indifferent. If it's bad, I'm not going to weigh up the consequences. I'm not going to take ownership. Obviously what we talked about off air falls into that ballpark. But I think people need to take a little bit more ownership, resolve, accountability of their own actions. You and I as coaches, I won't say should not be here. Obviously, we're going to always help because that's who we are as human beings. But you need to take some of the load yourself. I praise you for taking the bulls by the horns and fessing up to that you have a problem, but we need to fix it together, not somebody, here's my problem, boom, I'm going to put it at your feet and you fix it. If it was that easy, you and I would be millionaires. We just get on with it. It's like, okay, here's your problem, I'll put it on my back, I'm going to get on with it. Here you go, here's your problem back. A couple of weeks later, fixed. Next. But obviously life doesn't work like that. But obviously where I think the problem relies to a certain extent is obviously the social influence, the celebrity-ism that's being created of famous for being famous. So people want to be able to cut corners. I want to be able to get from point A to B as quickly as possible. Obviously, there's big celebrities out there wanted to become famous because they wanted to become famous, which says, if you actually listen back to that statement, there's no purpose to that intent. Why do you want to be famous? Technically, that's infamous, which would be the real word if you look it up in the dictionary. You're famous technically for something bad. I don't want to get political too much. If we use Hitler, generally bad. China, during the Red Revolution, from the Western perspective, bad. Obviously, everything that loses, bad. But that is still celebrity because it's not being forgotten. Irrespective of if it was good, but we learn from mistakes, I would hope, as a race. But ultimately, when we look at ourselves, maybe not so much. But what you mentioned when it comes down to food, you can probably put a blanket over a person. Because if you haven't been taught those kind of values, who are you to know any different? And ultimately, the people that say, I can't change, my family can't change because that's what we've ever known. It probably comes down to about two or three different factors. You don't want to, you don't know any different, and you've not been taught any different.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think the other category is probably people who live in what's called food deserts. So in the inner city where there might not be any grocery stores except for going to a convenience store, which is just loaded with junk food. So you might not even have access to, healthier food. I think that's an issue that somehow has to be addressed. And I know there was a program at least a year ago or so in New York City where they were taking inner city youth, and in some of the schools they had set up hydroponic gardens to grow food. And then they were teaching the kids how to prepare the food that was grown hydroponically, um, so that they could eat healthier. Um, so there's probably a need for more of that, especially in these areas that have food deserts, and that's a whole different conversation. But um, yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to change. It's just, I guess it's no different than there's some people who are being wheeled into the operating room on a gurney, about to have their chest cracked open for open heart surgery, and still won't make any changes to their lifestyle. And then there are others who are in that same situation who will make major changes to their lifestyle because they don't want to go through it again. Um, so it comes down to individual choice, and everyone's got to make their own decision. But there's enough resources out there, and not food resources as much as just learning resources, to be able to educate people if they want to be or choose to be educated more in terms of different choices that are available in terms of what to eat. And to me, falling back on the excuse that a lot of people use is, this is the way my mom prepared food, this is the way my grandma prepared food, I'm going to do it the same way, or whatever. Um, if you're satisfied with that, then great. But if you're morbidly obese and not willing to make changes in your lifestyle, um, because you're just set in your ways, then think about the impact that you not being there might be on all the people that rely on you, whether it's your family, your friends, your coworkers, whatever the case may be. And do you really want to risk dying early because you were resistant to making a change in your life? Um, and again, that's a personal choice, and everyone's going to make a different one. And some people you can't get them to see the light, and that's fine. I mean, that's a personal decision. But for others, even if you can get them to, I have a lot of clients, living in the southern part of the U.S. Most people, when they eat vegetables, they're fried. They're fried in oil or fat or whatever. That's the only way they know how to eat vegetables. But if you can just give them another option of, how about roasting them, or steaming them, or baking them, or maybe even eating them raw. Give it a shot and see what you think. Um, because if you can just make one small step by switching from, let's say, deep fried vegetables to roasted vegetables, you've now made a big impact on your health. And who knows where that will lead from there. So
my penultimate question to you then, Mitch, is I'm going to uplift people from the morbidity we're talking about. This is a bit of intrigue now for people. If you had to sit down with any coach, dead or alive, who would that be and why?
Any coach, dead or alive? I think from an athletic standpoint, I would have loved to spend some time with, and he's still alive, Phil Jackson. And it's interesting because growing up in Chicago and living up there for a while, we actually lived near the Chicago Bulls practice facility when he was a coach there. And my young kids, when my kids were young, my two boys were young, they went to basketball camp at the Bulls practice facility. And their coaches actually were Phil Jackson's sons. So they got exposed to some of that philosophy. But I would have loved to have been able to sit down to talk with him because, one, I think he had a great coaching style, but two, he had a very interesting outlook on life that was different than most coaches in sports. I think he made a major impact on his players' lives beyond the basketball court.
And my final question before we wrap up the episode, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
I think if you have any concerns about your health or well-being and you want to have a quality of life that allows you to do all the things that you want to be able to do throughout your life, then take care of yourself from both a nutrition as well as exercise standpoint. And some of that probably starts with some mindset work and changing some of your belief systems. And I think if you do that, you can lead a very healthy and productive and long life that can impact and influence a lot of people, both in your family as well as, beyond your family.
So once again, Mitch, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
James, I appreciate it. I always enjoy speaking with you.
That's my pleasure. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Hart. An athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.